This morning we're going to be tying up another ice fishing fly. We're going to call this the UV ice fly. And no, I didn't invent it. I found it kind of online. Haven't tried it yet. I've tied it a few times and enjoyed it, and I think it would do really well out ice fishing. It's called the UV ice fly because nearly all of the material we're going to put on here is going to be ultraviolet or UV. I have a couple of exceptions, and one of those exceptions is the tail that we'll tie in, as well as this thread that I'm using here. So we're going to take that just about that far down. I'm going to come back up a little bit and we'll start tying in our materials. So first we're going to put some crystal flash on. We're going to use this as a tail. This is kind of a silvery dark rainbow. I've taken one piece of it here and I'm going to fold this over. At the end of the day I want to have 4 little stubby tail things poking out of the bottom here. So I'm going to fold that in half, take the loop, cut it. Now I've got 2 strands. We'll take those 2 strands. We're going to tie them into the top of the hook. Everything we're going to tie in here is going to be on top of the hook shank. So we'll just take a wrap or 2 to lock that in place. I'm going to pull those other 2 back. Just about like that. I've got those 2 materials in. Next I'm going to tie in a piece of brassie sized blue wire. And this is going to be actually my 3rd non-UV material. You're probably wondering, when do you tie on any UV material? I'm going to tie this onto the top of the hook as well. And this is going to create a ribbing on the fly. It's also going to make the fly a little bit more durable. I'm going to come back down here. So we're going to finish with 2 pieces of orange flashabou. This is UV. And we're going to use it for the body. It's going to go over the top of the orange thread wraps we're making right now. So we'll go ahead and tie that material in. Just like that. Turn my thread counterclockwise because I want a taper on this where it's going to be skinnier here and get thicker up towards the bead. So I'm going to take all of those materials and kind of make sure I'm holding them on top of the hook shank, because that's where I want them to be. And really these 3 materials are going to do the bulk of the work for us. So getting these in right now, it's going to be incredibly helpful. I'm going to take that a little bit deeper down around the bend of the hook. Then we're going to come back up. And you'll note we've got a little bit of waste on that flashabou. And one of the reasons that I've tied this orange on the underside is this flashabou is very translucent, and I want whatever shows through it to be in an orange color. And so laying down an orange base will just help that out, help that pop, make it look orange rather than tying on black thread or a bare hook. Now with those materials in place, I'm just going to work on my taper here a little bit. I've spun my thread counterclockwise, and hopefully you can see that those fibers are spread out. That's just going to help me smooth this out. I get that flat thread by spinning my bobbin counterclockwise, which kind of unwinds that thread a little bit. So I turn my vise somewhat sideways so I can kind of look at the profile, see what we got going here. Still have a few little bumps, and this is just going to make the flashabou body that we're going to tie in much smoother with a taper built in. So then we're just going to go ahead and take this up behind the bead here, and we're going to make a couple of passes back and forth to kind of build up that taper a little bit more. It should be thickest up here towards the bead. So I'm just going to take a few thread wraps to kind of get it up to the same thickness as where I left off. And then I've got a couple of little bumps here that I want to work out. So we're going to go ahead and come back down. I take my time with this a little bit. I really want to make sure that I've got a good transition on this taper and that it's not overly bumpy. And with that, I think we're good to start using our material. I have my taper built in. I don't need a huge taper. I just want a noticeable taper. So let's go ahead and move on. So I've got my thread in the bobbin cradle just so that I can use both of my hands and keep that thread out of the way. And we're going to wrap this translucent orange flashabou up this taper orange background or underbody. I'll usually take the first several wraps of this just with my hands, just so that I can have a little bit more control and stay away from that hook point. As much as I can, I want to keep these wraps one in front of the other, so it won't be perfect. We may have a tiny little bit of orange popping through, but this is UV, so actually that orange popping through is going to create kind of a nice effect on this pattern. So let's go ahead and make sure these things will separate on you because I've got two of them. So I try to keep a tight hold on it. Flashabou is incredibly slippery. And it will come unwound if you let go. So we don't want to let go. Right up here, I'm going to be putting in a nice dubbing collar. So I don't mind if there's a little bit more showing through. I'm just going to take my thread. We're going to tie this off by taking a few wraps over the top. We want to keep this very tight, holding this very tight. Otherwise it's just going to come unwound on us, which is really not what I want to have happen right now. I'm going to pull that back a little bit, and to secure it I'm going to take a couple wraps back over it. So you can see it's not coming out right under the bead because I tied back, and that's just going to help us really secure that down. And go ahead and we're going to cut off the balance. So next we're going to take this brassie size blue wire and we're going to use it to rib. I'm actually going to want to wrap this the opposite way that I just wrapped that flashabou. And that will help this just lock down a little bit better. And we're going to take fairly open wraps. Like I said at the beginning, this is going to create that hint of segmentation, but it's also going to help keep that flashabou in place. So it'll just make this fly a little bit more durable. We'll go up right here behind the bead. By the way, the wire is not UV. That's one I left out, sorry. So one thing that's nice about wire, you can see I've just completely let go because it bends and it's wire. It's going to pretty much stay in place, so I don't have to hold it tight. It's not going to just come unwound on me. I'm going to take a couple of thread wraps over the top of that wire. Trying to keep that as tight as I can. You can see it's kind of slipping on me here a little bit. And we're starting to get a little gap here, but I'm fine with that because this last wrap of wire is going to be right under a big beefy dubbing collar. So I've got a couple of wraps there. I'm going to take a couple of wraps behind the bead. We're going to do the old friction helicopter method. Just kind of spin this around while you're pulling on it. It'll generate heat. It'll break off. Finally, we're going to come in and we're going to cut off these stubby tails. I want them just a little bit longer than, maybe a little bit less than the gap of the hook in length. For the collar, I'm just going to turn to some cinnamon ice dub. Notice that it's UV, so this will be UV as well. I prefer, especially on this ice dub that can be pretty coarse material, I like to throw it in a dubbing loop. Just makes it easier to get a nice tight dubbing rope. So I'm just going to take my little dubbing tool here. And the nice thing about these is they just spin. So we're just going to connect that to our thread. So it's kind of like that in between. And I'll let that dubbing twister kind of drop. I'll take my thread, I'm going to put it over the top of the hook. Going to take a couple of wraps around the base. That's just going to take those two fibers and hold them together. Plus we can tie it back to where we want this dubbing to start. I'm going to just take this back up to the front. So I'm going to prepare my dubbing. You can kind of see I like it kind of wispy like this. I've actually taken it and broke it apart several times just so that I could get rid of some of the longer fibers, breaking them in half or in thirds. We're going to open up our dubbing loop and carefully just set our dubbing inside that loop. Probably have a little bit extra on there, but that's okay. We can kind of pick that out. There are a lot of advantages to doing a dubbing loop, and that's one of them. So now I can just twist this dubbing with my dubbing twister. Just start spinning it, and you'll see it starting to make a nice dubbing loop, or dubbing rope. From here I can just pick out some of these spots where it looks like there's just way too much. I'm going to twist that a little tighter, and you can see we've got a nice spiky collar here. So we're going to build this up so it's pretty robust. We're going to go back to that second to last wrap of the wire here, and I want these wraps to be tight next to one another, and that's going to just help us build that heavier dubbing collar that I'm looking for. I'm going to proceed all the way up to behind the bead. Just about like that. You can see I still have some dubbing left on that dubbing rope, but because we used a dubbing loop, I can just cut that off after I secure it. So I've got my thread here, and I got my dubbing loop and dubbing rope there. I'm going to tie over the top of that dubbing rope with a couple of wraps right behind the bead. If this ends up having a more orange kind of collar showing up right behind the bead, small, that's fine. Absolutely fine. So pretty much have that secure. I'm just going to turn my vise, come on in with my scissors, and cut that off close. Got a little escapees. I'm going to just go ahead and clip those off for now. We'll turn this back straight up, and I'm going to stroke all of those fibers, as many as I can, backwards. We're going to have to do a little bit of trimming on this, but by stroking these backwards, hopefully we can keep a lot of those fibers not going over the bead or the eye of the hook here. Or just about like that. I'm going to come on in with my whip finisher. Take a 3 or 4 turn whip finish on this. Or 7. Whatever you prefer. Pull my thread tight. I'm going to come in with my thread cutter. Cut that off nice and close. From here, we're just going to work on some trimming. What I like is to not have fibers that are going clear back here to the tail and deep into the hook bend. It just kind of conceals this really nice body that we spent some time putting in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do some trimming, and we'll be right back. So with that, we're pretty much done after doing some trimming. You can see the body is still showing through now, again, the abdomen. We've got still a nice, robust, spiky kind of collar on here. Ends up being a really good looking fly. Being UV, it's going to kind of glow. So let me turn off the lights and we can kind of show you that. So I've made this really dark. We're going to go ahead and turn on our UV light, which we use to cure our UV resin. And hopefully you can start to see how that just kind of pops. The bead, the body, and the dubbing collar just light right up. So there you have it, the UV ice fly. Yeah, that's what we're calling it, UV ice fly. Not we, I've seen the pattern elsewhere. I think they called it something like that. Anyway, the UV, that it glows, I've read lots of different accounts. They're finding some species of fish can actually see in the ultraviolet spectrum. We'll have to see whether it makes any difference when we're fishing for trout through the ice. But there's a possibility that this would enhance that. The amount of what shows through or any glowing of this is going to depend on how much sun is coming through, which will be kind of questionable when we're fishing through a hole in the ice, but we're going to give it a shot. Wonderful pattern, kind of fun and easy to tie. Throw a hook in your vise and give this one a try.